Hey YouTube, Kira Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Vampire Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profile for April 2021. I've really enjoyed updating the Vampire deck throughout the years. It's a very interesting zombie deck that focuses on some of the more higher level powerhouse vampire monsters and tributing them off and using all the different spell cards they have at their disposal for additional summons, and then also accessing the extra deck for some of their other forms of boss monsters to summon out onto the field, taking advantage of destroying your opponent's monsters when cards are sent to the graveyard, and also just benefit from, taking away big resources your opponent may use. For those of you that play Duel Links, this is also a pretty powerful card and deck to go up against with the NPC character. They always seem to have the, biggest powerhouse cards for me to go up against whenever I face them, but also a very, very fun deck to use in the actual Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG as well. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So for the higher level vampire monsters, I run two Vampire Scarlet Scourge. If this card is normal or special summon, you can pay 1,000 life points to target one vampire monster in your graveyard, except for Scarlet Scourge, and special summon it, but it cannot attack this turn. And you can only use this effect of Scarlet Scourge once per turn. And at the end of the battle phase, if this card destroyed a monster by battle, you can special summon them from the graveyard to your field. So these resources are a big part of it, just being able to use those resources to your advantage, because we are running the zombie world lineup in the deck, making all monsters on the field zombies. So depending on what we take from our opponent, we can make use of them for our own extra deck summons, including going into other cards like Nether Soul Dragon, and also cards like Vampire Sucker requiring two zombie monsters to make. So this card is great for doing basically what this deck was meant to do down to its core, but you really only need two of this card. It's searchable with some of the other cards we run in the deck. I also run two Vampire Fraulein. When a monster declares an attack, you can special summon this card from your hand in defense position. You can only use this effect of Vampire Fraulein once per turn, and once per battle. If your zombie monster battles an opponent's monster during damage calculation, quick effect, you can pay life points in multiples of 100 with a maximum of 3,000, and your battling monster gains that much attack points and defense during damage calculation. And at the end of the battle phase, if this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can basically special summon it from the graveyard to your field. So very, very useful. And the fact that it can just help with gaining attack and defense can help to play defensively against any of your opponent's monsters that this card does battle with. And also playing on the fact that Scarlet Scourge is more of the offensive type of monster in the deck. Fraulein plays in more for the defense, like I just spoke of before. For some other powerhouse setup, I also run one Vampire Vamp and also one Shadow Vampire. Both of these cards with Shadow Vampire, when this card is normal summon, you can special summon one Dark Vampire monster from your hand or deck, except for Shadow Vampire. But if you do, only that monster can attack for the rest of this turn. And this card cannot be used as Xyz material except for the Xyz summon of a Dark monster, which isn't, difficult at all because it's the majority of what we run in the deck. And Vampire Vamp being able to, once per turn, when this card or vampire is normal summoned to your side of the field, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls whose attack is higher than this card, equip it to this card, and then this card gains attack equal to the combined original attack of the monsters equipped to it by this effect. And if this card is sent to the graveyard while equipped with a card by this effect, special summon this card from the graveyard. So just a great way to take away some of the powerhouses from your opponent, but also resources, depending on which one you want to use. Also will depend on just the search power and the play you want to go for, but I only run one of each. They're a little more situational than I would say Scarlet Scourge and Fraulein's scenarios that come into play, but still great just to have both these options available in the deck. For some of the more resource building vampire cards, I also run three Vampire Retainer. If this card is special summon, you can pay 500 life points to add one Vampire Spell or Trap from your deck to your hand. If this card is in your graveyard, you can send one Vampire card from your hand or face up on the field to the graveyard to special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use each effect of Vampire Resonator once per turn. So this is the search power for a good majority of our different vampire cards, including one of the more important ones, Vampire's Domain. I run three of it just so you always have this resource available to you. With only being 500 life points and starting the game with 8,000 life points, you can use this a pretty good amount of time during the game. The same with Vampire's Familiar, which I also run three of. If this card is special summon, You can pay 500 life points to add one vampire monster from your deck to your hand, except for Vampire Familiar. If it's in the graveyard, being able to send a vampire card from your hand to the graveyard to special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. Having these same resources, just searching out monsters, like Vampire Retainer, searching out spells and traps, and being able to add a monster, except Familiar. You have access to all of the boss monsters I spoke of beforehand, having that easy search power, and the fact that Vampire Familiar is a level 1 monster, it is also a 1-for-1 target, so you can set up other monsters in your graveyard and then summon out Vampire Familiar onto the field. For more zombie support, I also run 3 Mizuki. With this card, you can banish it from your graveyard to target a zombie monster in your graveyard and special summon that target. So even if you special summon out your Retainer or Familiar with your Mizuki, you can still gain the monster effect of when it is special summoned by just paying 500 life points, and it won't have to be banished because you didn't special summon it with their own monster effects. I also run 2 Gozuki. For more setup during your main phase, you can send 1 zombie monster from your deck to the graveyard, and if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can banish 1 zombie monster from your graveyard, except Gozuki to special summon 1 zombie monster from your hand. So, with no limitations for their summon, you can hit some of the bigger zombie monsters on the field that much more easily using Gozuki, but I like Gozuki also just being able to send cards like Mezuki to the graveyard to banish, to then set up any of the other ones we may have already in the graveyard, or even just alone setting them up in the graveyard with their own cards, and then just sending a vampire to the graveyard from your hand to special summon them back to the field. I even considered running this card at 3. If you were to run it at 3, I would consider taking out one of the next card, which is just 3 Unizombie. You can target 1 face-up monster on the field, discard 1 card. If you do, increase its level by 1. And you can target 1 face-up monster on the field. Monsters you control cannot attack for the rest of its turn, except for zombies. Also, send 1 zombie from your deck to the graveyard. If you do, increase that target's level by 1. So with it, you can reach up to the proper levels needed to exceed summon into our Damper Vampire Sheridan, our boss monster for the extra deck. But also, having tuner options with Unizombie is a big help for just having some of the synchros available in the extra deck to go into, and also being able to send a zombie monster is just more setup in the graveyard depending on which one you send. And I also run to finish off the monsters in the main deck, just 2 Jackal Bolin. You can discard 1 zombie monster to special summon this card from your hand. And during your opponent's main phase, quick effect, you can target 1 zombie monster in either graveyard, special summon that monster, but banish it when it leaves the field. Then banish this face-up card until the end phase. So just another easy special summon graveyard setup like I spoke of plenty of times already in this video. And just being able to special summon more resources to use on the field. It'll be banished, but still having benefits for some of the other cards, depending on what you special summon, can be good for your search power altogether. And that is it for the monsters. We'll now move on to the spells. I run 3 Vampire's Domain. It's a continuous spell. Once per turn, you can pay 500 life. During your main phase this turn, normal summon 1 vampire in addition to your normal summoner set, even if this card leaves the field. And you can only gain this effect once per turn. And each time your vampire monster inflicts battle damage to your opponent, gain the same amount of life points. So the best way to gain back all the different ways where you spend 500 life points to get search power, or just defense power, or even resources of your opponent. This card, you always want to have it set up on the field. That's why I run 3 of it. It's searchable with Vampire's Retainer, and just being able to have this card set and have the additional normal summon means you can go for just the generic play of summoning out your card, paying 500 life, and then going into your bigger monster using them. I also run 2 Vampire's Desire. This is a spell that once again is searchable with Vampire's Core, but being able to target a face-up monster, to send 1 vampire monster from your deck to the graveyard with a different level from that monster, and the target monster becomes that level, it's the best setup to go into Sheridan. Just aside from Unizombie, you can just equal out the correct level you need for Sheridan to use to go into that card. Or you can target a vampire in your graveyard, send 1 monster you control the graveyard to special summon that other monster, and the special summon will trigger your Retainer or your Core, depending on which one you summon of those 2, gaining you an additional search. I also, for the field spells now, run 1 Vampire Kingdom and 2 Zombie World, and the 1 Terraforming. Now, depending on what you want on the field, Vampire Kingdom can help to boost the attack of your zombie-type monsters. And also, with this card, when a card is sent from your opponent's deck to the graveyard, target 1 card on the field, send 1 Dark Vampire monster from your hand or deck to the graveyard. If you do, destroy that card. So more setup in the graveyard. I like it for the power boost as well. Zombie World, making everything zombies on the field and graveyard, can be good for the play you may want to get from your extra deck. And then just more resources for you to use, depending on if you take your opponent's cards. And the Terraforming can search out any of the field spells you may need for that setup. Vampire Kingdom has a trap, which I'm also running in the deck for that search power. So most of the time with Terraforming, I search out either of these Zombie World targets. And for some of the more generic spells, I run 2 Super Polymerization. This is just my preferred way to go into some of the other zombie monsters, including Nether Soul Dragon, just so I can have more options for attacking multiple times during the battle phase. And the Super Poly discard can help to just set up more of the vampire cards in the graveyard to make use of. For the one-ofs for these spells, I run 1 Call by the Grave, pretty standard, just being able to stop my opponent's graveyard plays. Foolish Burial can set up more monsters in my graveyard for me to use for special summons, or just, like I said, the send power of Mizuki. 1-for-1, Vampire Core. It's a great target to search for the special summon, because not only do you get a monster on the field, you also get the search for just 500 life points. And lastly, 1 Monster Reborn. We've spoken about special summoning plenty enough in this video, and just the benefits it has for depending on what you special summon to the field, so it's a definite card to use in the deck. And then for the traps, I run 2 of the counter trap, Vampire Domination. This is another searchable card through your Vampire Retainer, so great there. When a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated while you control a vampire monster, negate the activation. If you do, destroy that card. Then if it was a monster card, gain life points equal to its original attack. You can only activate once per turn, but once again, a searchable counter trap is a great counter trap, especially for the fact that this card can stop a good majority of your opponent's spells, traps, and monster effects, just at the cost of having a vampire monster on the field, and gaining life is just an additional bonus for all the life you use in this deck. And then lastly, for the traps and the main deck, just 1 Vampire Takeover, another search, and just another option to thin out the deck to go into our field spell, Vampire Kingdom. What's great is if your opponent's attacking, you can just activate this card and then activate the Vampire Kingdom, which will boost up your own monsters on the field. And then being able to have that setup means that you can hit over your opponent's monsters that may be swinging into one of your monsters, thinking they were stronger to attack into it. And that is it for the main deck. We'll now move on to the extra deck. I run 1 Damper Vampire Sheridan. You need 2 level 6 monsters. If you use a monster with a level that is owned by your opponent for the Exceed summon of this card, treat it as a level 6. Once per turn, you can detach 1 material from this card to target 1 card your opponent controls, send it to the graveyard, and once per turn, if a monster is sent from your field to your opponent's graveyard by a card effect, or a monster is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can detach 1 material from this card to special summon one of those monsters to your field. Once again, taking resources, but also giving you more options to use those cards, depending on if you used your opponent's monster for going into this card, which you can do most of the time by using your Vampire Scarlet Scourge, and then just giving you the option to special summon that card back onto your field. I only run the 1. I also run 1 number 24 Dragulus, the Vampiric Dragon. Just more options to go into this card. It's not a zombie, but still good just for the additional special summon options for this card to keep coming back onto the field. And I also run 1 Beals, the Diabolic Dragon, just needing a Dark Tuner, so with Unizombie, pretty easy to go into this card, especially with the level adjustment. And 1 Borreload Savage Dragon. I do use Link Monsters a good amount in this deck, so having this card as another resource is just a plus to stop my opponent's monster effects. For the fusions, I run 1 Starving Venom Fusion Dragon and 1 Nether Soul Dragon. With this card, just needing 2 zombies and being a true powerhouse, with the benefit of being able to special summon a token out onto the field when it battles. But great for the Super Poly target, just to attack with my vampires, then go into this card with 3,000 attack. Or if I have a Dark Attribute monster and my opponent has one, going into Starving Venom by using one of their own monsters. For the Link monsters, I run 1 Vampire Sucker, just another good card I can use with Zombie World, taking my opponent's resources, making their monster a zombie, and then using it for a Link summon. Barricade Board Blocker with the continuous spells and the field spells I run, and just being able to recycle them with this Link monster. 2 Wee Witch's Apprentice with the majority of the deck being Dark Attribute monsters. This is just a good way to power up those monsters even more, along with Vampire Kingdom. Also 1 Nightmare Cerberus, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 Cross Sheep for the different extra deck options available to us, since we are running a good majority of them, 1 Nightmare Unicorn, and 1 Apollosa Bow of the Goddess to finish off the extra deck. And then as for the go-to plays, one of my favorites is because you just have so many options available to you. If you open up just 1-for-1 and 1 additional monster in your hand, depending on what the monster is, it can be just that much more of a benefit. But you can then go for the 1-for-1, activating, sending whatever monster in your hand to the graveyard, and then special summoning out your Vampire Familiar. With this card, when special summon, being able to pay a 500 life to add 1 vampire monster from your deck to your hand, which then you'll want to go for the Scarlet Scourge most of the time, or if your opponent has a higher attack point monster on the field, you can go for Vampire Vamp, because then when a vampire monster is normal summoned to your side of the field, being able to then target one face-up card on the field and take it. But most of the time, you'll want to go for the Scourge, because then you can distribute Familiar into the graveyard, summoning out Scarlet Scourge, and then having the option to take, when it's normal or special summon, to pay 1,000 life to target a vampire monster in your graveyard except for Scarlet Scourge. Special summon it, but it cannot attack this turn. And you can only use this effect once per turn. And then having the option to take and battle your opponent's monsters. But then don't forget, if you have more and more resources available in your hand, depending on what you search, you can then go for the fusion play using these two monsters. If you have the option for, let's say, Vampire's Domain in your hand, then I would prefer to go for the Vampire Vamp if my opponent has a monster on the field, because then I will have the special summon of Familiar, being able to then tribute to go into Vamp, activate Domain, gaining an additional normal summon depending on what the vampire may be. Then you can use Vampire Vamp to take your opponent's monster and equip it onto this card, gaining more additional attack, and then just having more plays to go from there, being able to then use, let's say, the monsters for a Link summon, which you set up the Mizuki in the graveyard still, having the Vampire Core in that graveyard, going for a Link 2 play, using those two zombie monsters into Vampire Sucker, and then having the Mizuki play to banish two special summon Vampire Vamp back onto your field again, while setting up the Vampire Retainer in your graveyard, if that was the card you normal summoned, to then send another vampire from your hand to the graveyard to special summon it back onto the field, gaining you the search for another vampire spell to use afterwards. And then one of my other plays that I enjoy as a go-to play is with Gozuki. Spoke of before, you summon out a Gozuki to send one zombie during your main phase from your deck to the graveyard. So you can send, with this one, your Vampire Retainer. And with this card then, when it's in your graveyard, you can send one vampire card from your hand or face up on the field to the graveyard to special summon this card. So depending on what you have in your hand, you'll just need the vampire. So remember that if you have a familiar or another retainer, sending one of those to the graveyard to special summon a retainer back onto the field just opens up more plays with Gozuki for that setup, because then you can use the 500 pay with retainer to add another domain. And then if you have the higher level monster in your hand, then a additional normal summon, depending on which one you summon out to the field. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Once again, I said vampires are a very, very fun deck to try out, and the combo ratio can definitely differ depending on how many of each card you want to run and what card you want to go for. But I hope you all enjoyed the video. Until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.